everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
DanMachi, why am I being crowned the Lord of Cinder? Chapter 152 to 160, Chapter 152, A Dumbfounded Reveria, Ina's Shocking News. 1,303 words. When Loki heard the name, Ron, a name she would never forget, mentioned by Finn, the captain of her own familia, her mood instantly became complicated. It was all because of that guy. Well, not exactly a trap set by Hephaestus, more like a misjudgment on her part. And now she was stuck with a debt of 25 million valis, trying to settle the account herself. Which left her with no choice but to negotiate with Reveria. Compared to that, though, she was even more curious why Finn would know about this guy. It had already been some time since Ron broke the world record. Rio didn't have that many idle people who would keep talking about him all day long. Besides, Finn had just returned to the Familia residence after finishing an expedition. Yet the first thing he did was ask about Ron. Could it be that he learned about the commotion this kid caused through some other channel? Thinking this, Loki slightly frowned but didn't deny it. I know him. An adventurer from the Hestia Familia. Finn, where did you hear about him? Hestia Familia. Not entirely unfamiliar, though whenever he heard that name before, it was usually Loki complaining. So, how could such an obscure, ordinary familia possibly have an adventurer like Ron, someone with that level of strength, and even several members capable of using magic? Setting aside external factors. Based solely on Ron's performance in the dungeon, facing the ancient dragon Lanciax, Finn had already formed a clear judgment of the young adventurer's strength. Comparable to most level 4 adventurers. At the same level, even if it were him facing that mutated floor boss, he wasn't confident he could defeat it as cleanly and decisively as Ron had. That was the truth. Endless combat methods, extremely seasoned battle experience. Even now, he still found it unbelievable. Disemboweling himself before battle, absorbing the dragon's flames, dying and reviving, if not for the fact that Ron could communicate normally, he might have thought he was dealing with a monster. What's more, the abnormal situation in the dungeon was very likely connected to him. Finn simply couldn't believe that someone like this would remain unknown in Rio, especially when, until recently, he hadn't even heard his name, let alone a title. Facing Loki's question, he glanced at Reveria, then finally nodded. On our way back to Rio today after the expedition, we ran into Ron on the 12th floor. He's also Lafia's friend. At the time, we encountered a dungeon abnormality in that area, and then we saw Ron. He was in the middle of defeating the floor boss that appeared there. That really is quite a coincidence. Abnormal situation. Hearing those words again, Loki's tightly knit brows didn't relax. Still, she didn't jump to the conclusion that Ron was the source. Her mood was inevitably complicated. The time left for Rio to complete the final commission, the subjugation of the Black Dragon, was running out. And lately, even the dungeon itself had been filled with frequent anomalies. It was hard to see any of it as a good sign. Loki lightly shook her head. Thinking about the matter of the great sacred tree branch, she spoke casually, so. That means he was the one who killed the mutated infant dragon floor boss on the 12th floor. The blonde boy nodded, but when he recalled the massive size of the ancient dragon Lanciax and its nominal level for strength, he shook his head again. That thing. Even a standard level 3 adventurer party would have absolutely no chance against it. He forced a slight smile, more or less. He's an extremely seasoned adventurer. His methods are quite unexpected. So I wanted to ask you, Lady Loki. It's normal you didn't hear about him during your expedition. However, just as she was about to give a simple explanation, Loki suddenly thought about it. A talent like that, and it was Hestia, of all people, who had recruited him through sheer dumb luck. Her teeth started to ache. Even her tone turned a bit resentful. In the month you were away, Ron, forget Rio, even the whole world, he's made quite a name for himself. He broke Ace's world record. He shortened the fastest time to reach level 2 to just 16 days. And his overall stats are even more outrageous than Ace's back then. As she said this, the expressions on Finn and Riveria's faces shifted, from seriousness to confusion, then slowly into sheer disbelief. It was indeed shocking for the Familia members. But Loki wasn't happy at all, because that talent wasn't hers. And then there's the war game with the Apollo Familia. It happened a few days ago. Apollo probably saw Ron's potential and initiated a war game against the Hestia Familia. And the result was the Apollo Familia, with 1 level 3 adventurer and over 10 level 2s, was completely swept by Ron. At the time, the Hestia Familia only had 2 members, plus hired reinforcements. Which was also how that massive debt came to be. Of course, Loki would never mention that part in front of Finn. If he knew the truth, he'd probably be sent straight back to the heavens. The living room of the Familia residence fell silent. In the Loki Familia, wiping out Apollo wouldn't be difficult. Tiona and her sister could do it easily. But this situation wasn't comparable at all. Breaking a world record, reducing it to 16 days. What kind of absurd talent did it take to achieve that? More importantly, Apollo had launched the war game precisely because of Ron's potential. The time gap between those events couldn't have been long. And yet, Ron relied solely on his own strength, ignored the disparity in numbers, and didn't even struggle. He outright crushed the Apollo Familia. Even for Riveria, a long-lived elf, this kind of miracle was something she had never witnessed before. And yet, it had happened right in front of her. A monster. The only comparable example she could think of was Althea, who possessed the highest level of talent. But the miracle created by silence came from being raised by the goddess Hera with abundant resources. Did Ron have access to anything like that? Absolutely not. If that were all, Riveria might have simply thought Orario had gained a highly talented adventurer. But combined with their encounter in the dungeon, that savage, life-on-the-edge fighting style. No. That boy who fought as if walking a blade's edge. The conclusion she and Finn had reached after discussion was clear: he is absolutely at level for strength. And now you're telling me the adventurer who single-handedly slaughtered the ancient dragon Lanciax had only just recently reached level 2. How the hell does that make any sense? Riveria fell silent. She didn't even know how to describe her feelings. She could only cast a complicated glance toward Finn. Fortunately, he wore the same "what the hell did I just hear" expression. Completely unaware of their reaction, Loki lounged on the sofa, lazily stretching as she looked toward her friend's daughter, Ina Tool, sitting not far away. She smacked her lips. Ina, is there anything you want to add about Ron? Hearing Finn and Riveria talk about the adventurer she was responsible for made Ina genuinely happy. But when Loki asked her directly, the half-elf girl hesitated. Mainly because, at this point in the Adventurers Guild, this kind of information wasn't exactly a secret anymore. After thinking it over, Ina nodded lightly and corrected Loki's earlier statement. Actually, when Lady Hestia submitted the Familia's updated adventurer roster today, she also updated the levels of the current members. Mr. Ron. He has already advanced to level 3. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 153, Chapter 153, The Spokesperson of Miracles, Ron. 1,273 words. Ron, he has already ascended to a level 3 adventurer. The Familia's expedition party was about to return to Orario, and there were many matters to handle. Moreover, since Ron belonged to Hestia's Familia, they hadn't paid much attention to him. Even so, they would still go to the Adventurers Guild from time to time to inquire about Ron's situation. If this kind of behavior were discovered by that short stack, it would definitely become material for ridicule. But who could have expected such explosive news? Even as a god. After hearing Ina's words, Loki rarely dropped her usual squinting expression. Instead, she stared at the half-elf who was recounting the facts with an extremely solemn gaze. It was clear that the information was absolutely genuine. But this development had already exceeded her expectations. Rarely, she straightened her back and asked, "Ina, how long has it been since Ron became an adventurer in total?" "As of now, it should be 35 days. I never expected it either. Mr. Ron's strength would grow this quickly. Back then, he even came to me to consult about the distribution of monsters in the dungeon. And in the blink of an eye, he's already become a level 3 adventurer." When mentioning Ron, the half-elf girl's smile carried a trace of emotion. Even though the later communications were all handled by Mikoto, she could understand that, as the leader, he must be extremely busy. Not to mention all the things that had happened. But after Ina finished speaking, Loki and the upper ranks of the Familia fell completely silent. It was so quiet that even breathing could be heard. Clearly, even the half-elf girl herself hadn't expected the shock such news would bring. From registering as an adventurer until now, 35 days, and he has broken through to level 3. In the past, they would have simply dismissed such news as rumors or fabrications. But the source was Ina from the Adventurers Guild. There was no need to question its authenticity. Just in terms of growth speed, let alone surpassing Ace of their own Familia, even in the future, it was likely that no adventurer would ever break this miracle. Loki swallowed hard. "Ina, what about his specific ability values?" "This involves Mr. Ron's privacy, so I'm sorry. But in Orario, they are absolutely among the very top." Ina gently shook her head. Even if she didn't say it, Loki had her own ways to obtain that information. That meant all of his ability values were at least at rank A. Only now did Loki finally understand why, during the Donatus, when Ron's adventurer title was being decided, Hestia had reacted the way she did. Dissatisfied. And without much bargaining, she had instead wanted to use that meeting to determine Ron's level 3 title. So, after the war game ended, Ron had already broken through to level 3. Her gaze grew distant, yet her emotions were anything but calm. That's right. The reason gods came to Orario was to pursue the miracles that existed within humans. Even if he wasn't a child of her own Familia, she was still witnessing the birth of a miracle. Or rather, Ron is the spokesperson of miracles. Pain. Loki was shaken to the core, but even more than that, she felt deep regret. Why hadn't she encountered Ron first? With such monstrous talent, defeating the Black Dragon in the future would be a trivial matter. Monster. An adventurer with such strength could not possibly remain unknown. Finn's speculation had not been wrong, and now the facts were laid bare. It wasn't that he was ignorant, it was simply that Ron's growth had been too fast. His various ability values had already reached the top tier in Orario. It was only natural that he could kill a level 4 ancient dragon like Lanciax. Probably. It won't be long before Ron becomes a first-class adventurer of Orario. The blonde youth now felt like his worldview was collapsing. Through endless effort, overcoming countless hardships, it had taken him 28 years to reach his current level. Yet before a true genius, reality was that the other party would need at most half a year to surpass him. Hero. Could he be the reincarnation of a hero? Finn had no intention of investigating further. But when this was connected to the abnormal phenomenon Ron had triggered in the dungeon, it formed a strangely logical explanation. Under normal circumstances, only a floor boss like Goliath in the middle floors could possess level 4 strength. But Ron had encountered such an existence in the upper floors, which perhaps meant that the difficulty of the dungeon he experienced was completely different from that of ordinary adventurers. An extremely harsh dungeon environment had allowed his already extraordinary talent to fully manifest in Orario. Thinking of this, Finn suddenly raised his head. His horrified gaze turned toward Riveria. Clearly, the elf royal with vast experience had realized this as well. This is absolutely an opportunity for the Loki Familia's development. But how should they proceed? The blonde youth had no concrete idea. After hesitating for a moment, he cautiously asked, "Lady Loki, how do you view Ron? If I hadn't seen him myself, I would suspect that guy is a monster wearing human skin." Faced with Ron, who had shattered her worldview, Loki gave the highest possible evaluation. Looking at the green-haired elf, she knew this might be one of her few chances to discuss the great sacred tree branch with Riveria. After careful consideration, she finally organized her words. "Ahem. Riveria, there's actually something I want to ask your opinion on. It's also about Ron. I don't know how he managed to persuade Hephaestus, but he got her to agree. He wants to purchase a branch of the great sacred tree. The price is 50 million valis." After saying this, Loki narrowed her eyes, observing Riveria's expression. From a standpoint of position, the elf royal in front of her didn't have a particularly good relationship with those in the hidden sanctuary. If she were to refuse, then the final hope would be Lafia, the branch of the great sacred tree. To Riveria, this was not unfamiliar. It was a material used to craft magic staffs and magic weapons. As for how Ron had convinced Hephaestus, perhaps it was because of the talent he possessed, one that even gods praised. Fortunately, Loki hadn't rashly agreed. Back when Riveria fled the elven sanctuary, her relationship with them had already become extremely strained. Whether they could even obtain it, she couldn't give a definite answer. "For now, I can't say. However, Ron is friends with Lafia. If it's a branch from the elven sanctuary's great sacred tree, they should be willing to give Lady Loki some face. At last, the debt problem might be resolved." Loki slumped onto the sofa, narrowing her eyes as she finally let out a breath of relief. Since Riveria hadn't explicitly refused, there was still room to maneuver. However, before she could relax, she heard the calm, cool voice of the green-haired elf add, "If possible, for the transaction regarding the great sacred tree branch, could we invite Ron to discuss it at our familiar residence? There are some things I would like to ask him." "What things?" "For now, it's not convenient to disclose." Riveria gently shook her head. But in the face of Loki's antics, her tone remained firm. "I believe this matter may concern the future of the Loki Familia. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 154, Chapter 154, this guy's personality is actually pretty good. 1262 words. After leaving the dungeon and returning safely to Rio, Ron's goal was very clear: turn the materials dropped from slaying the ancient dragon Lanciax into equipment. Now that the Familia's financial situation had improved significantly, then, as the captain of the Familia, he needed to start considering other aspects, such as the safety of Daphne, Cassandra, and the others inside the Souls-like dungeon. The overall difficulty was right there. With the revival skill he possessed, to be honest, he didn't need much in the way of defensive gear. He only needed to push his weapon to the highest possible grade. But for the members of the Familia, high-quality armor could ensure that when they were attacked by dungeon monsters, they wouldn't be instantly killed at the worst moment, it could keep them alive. That's the general situation. As we move into the middle floors, the dungeon environment will only become more hostile. The scales dropped from the ancient dragon can be forged into quite a lot of armor. You can choose a smith yourselves and customize it according to your preferences. If you want better cost-effectiveness, I recommend going to Lady Hephaestus's weapon shop. Ron's gaze swept across the girls present. Finally, he left the decision to Daphne. Is there really a difference? Back in the Apollo Familia, equipment was something each adventurer handled on their own. Daphne understood clearly why Ron would bring this up at this moment. The mutated Minotaur, the ancient dragon Lanciax, and they hadn't even reached the middle floors yet. The difficulty had already made Daphne feel pressured. The key issue was that the information she had about dungeon monsters on each floor would soon become completely useless. Forging higher-grade armor, at its core, was to avoid dying in the dungeon. After all, not everyone had monstrous talent like Ron. There is. If you choose customization, you'll have to bear the cost yourself, and the armor will belong to you. If it's the other option, the Familia will cover the cost. You'll only have the right to use the equipment. This was the solution Ron arrived at after careful consideration. Acting independently. Perhaps in the middle floors, a same-day round trip would still be possible. But dungeon exploration and expeditions would inevitably require going to the lower floors, or even the deep floors. Just getting there would already take considerable time. Not to mention carrying various daily supplies. The development of the Familia was something he had to consider. Since he chose to grow it, he naturally had to do it properly. The latter. Even with raw materials, the Valis required to forge them into equipment was far beyond what Daphne and Cassandra could afford. As for the members' specific benefits, Ron didn't mention it, but just the fact that they were exploring a dungeon of this level of difficulty, high risk, yes, but absolutely an opportunity most adventurers could only dream of. The Familia would even provide armor for exploration. At least in Daphne's eyes, the benefits already surpassed those of most familias in Rio. She probed indirectly, Captain Ron. If that's the case, will the Familia's liquidity be affected? That was a good question. After the war game and the gamble, the money earned from Xanis alone had brought their current savings to nearly 100 million Valis. More than enough to forge armor. Faced with Daphne's concern, Ron answered without the slightest hesitation, even if the money runs out, we can always find ways to earn more. But if you die in the dungeon, that's a price no amount of Valis can buy back. Safety is always the first rule of dungeon exploration. From those words, Daphne could clearly feel the captain's concern. It was something she had never experienced in the Apollo Familia. But anyone could say something like that. Except when it came from Ron, the very same person whose combat style in the dungeon was completely reckless and fearless of death. It just felt strange. Daphne nodded, coming to terms with it. You're the captain. You're right. But the gratitude she truly wanted to express, she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. Instead, she quietly kept that special care deep in her heart. This guy actually has a pretty good personality. After arriving at the Hephaestus weapon shop, Mikoto, Daphne, and the others returned to the Familia base first, leaving Ron alone to handle the equipment matters. He didn't find Hestia in the shop. It wasn't because the Familia's improved finances had made her revert to her carefree heavenly lifestyle, rather, there were many Familia-related matters she needed to handle. Such as updating Familia information, registering new members, and so on. Dragging along the overstuffed supporter backpack, Ron made his way to the office with practiced ease. He knocked lightly on the door, and soon a mature, composed voice came from inside, "Come in." However, when the red-haired woman with a black eye patch over her left eye, exuding a mature charm, looked up and noticed Ron dragging his backpack and coming to her again on his own initiative, she showed no resistance. Hephaestus stood up from the soft sofa. Her fitted white shirt perfectly outlined her graceful figure. Without giving Ron a chance to speak, her full red lips curved slightly. About the special staff you wanted to customize, it should be ready very soon. Ron could affect the future of our Familia. After hearing those words, Loki narrowed her eyes, looking at the usually calm and steady elven princess in surprise. Based on Riveria's personality, she would never casually say something like that. The Familia had grown to its current scale in Rio, and she didn't believe it was her own merit. It was purely the result of the children's continuous efforts. Even though she was unwilling to admit it, the truth was that Ron's talent was indeed the most outstanding she had ever seen since arriving in Rio. It's not to the point of affecting the future, right? If her guess wasn't wrong, the source of the dungeon's abnormal phenomenon was Ron. Through the altered exploration environment and floor bosses, it was possible to accelerate the growth of ability values and the accumulation of great feats. The overall strength of the Loki Familia could rise rapidly in a short period of time. It was just Riveria hadn't figured out how to approach Ron about it. Secretly prying into someone else's secrets, let alone asking to explore the dungeon together, might provoke his displeasure. Everything was uncertain. Facing Loki's suspicious gaze, Riveria frowned slightly. Does Lady Loki really think I would joke about something like this? Loki shook her head decisively. If what Riveria said was true, if the secret Ron possessed could really affect the future of a Familia, then how should they handle it? They couldn't exactly imitate the Apollo Familia and initiate a war game against that shorty, could they? Even though she and Hestia often bickered. Such a despicable method was something Loki would never resort to. Even if proposed, the other side could simply refuse outright due to the gap in strength. Moreover, during that brief encounter at Apollo's banquet, even without direct interaction, Loki could already sense that Ron was the type who wouldn't act without sufficient benefit. So she chose to completely give up. Even if Ron's secret could affect the future of our Familia, this guy is still the captain of that shorty's Familia. What makes you think that he'd be willing to help us? I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 155, Chapter 155, Progress on the Glintstone Staff. 1194 words. Forcing or threatening the other party. That kind of thing was completely out of the question. The strength Ron had displayed, becoming a top-tier adventurer in Rio was only a matter of time. Even the secrets he carried were beneficial to the entire Loki Familia. At the very least, their relationship absolutely could not be strained. After thinking it over, Riveria realized she had been too hasty. Then, we'll first try approaching Ron using a branch from the Great Sacred Tree. If the elf secret realm where Lafia is doesn't agree to sell it, I'll still find a way. No matter what, I'll get that branch for Ron. I'll go find Lafia first. With the next course of action decided, the previously tense atmosphere within the Familia quickly returned to its usual order. But deep inside Finn, Riveria, and the others, their emotions were far from calm. As the green-haired elf stood up and left the living room, pushing open the door, what came into view was a girl with beauty no less than that of a goddess, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders. Ace Wallenstein. The girl still wore that same vacant expression. But from the slight furrow of her slender brows and the curiosity flickering within her amber eyes, one could easily tell, she had definitely heard the entire conversation just now. Riveria understood well, given Ace's strong-willed nature, she would never feel discouraged over something like this. So she didn't bring up Ron. Ace? Have you seen Lafia? She's in her room. The blonde girl turned around and pointed behind her. Because in the area of the 17th floor, they had encountered a massive gathering of minotaurs, and due to the battle, monsters had even begun fleeing toward the upper floors. Ace had carried out a full-scale hunt. Fortunately, the entire process went smoothly, and no adventurers were affected. After that, she returned alone to Rio and made a trip to North Street. After buying a portion of red bean cream-flavored Jagamarukan, she returned to the Familia residence. She had originally planned to go sit in the living room and eat, but ended up overhearing a discussion inside about a new adventurer named Ron. Breaking world records. Sweeping through the Apollo Familia in the war game. Her brows knit slightly, not because she felt any pressure, but simply because, without realizing it, she had already finished the Jagamarukan in the oil paper bag in her hand. Oh. I'll go buy another portion. Compared to those empty reputations, what Ace was actually more curious about was that new adventurer who had fought the mimic war shadow on the 6th floor before the Familia expedition. There was nothing more capable of stirring her curiosity than monsters she had never seen before. So, how exactly can I find you? Glintstone staff. No one could resist becoming a mage. If there was anything more technical than a shield poke build, it would be the astrologer from Elden Ring. Most importantly, the DanMachi world didn't have such strict limits on mana. As long as one's mental strength was sufficient, it was entirely possible to achieve the effect of a spell machine gun inside the dungeon. After encountering the ancient dragon Lanciax, Ron had already realized the monsters in the upper floors were nothing more than appetizers. The real challenge would begin after entering the middle floors. Enriching one's combat methods as much as possible would absolutely increase the overall safety of the team. Most importantly, this staff was personally forged by Hephaestus. Looking at the tall, mature woman before him, before he could even ask in detail, Hephaestus began explaining, "As for the branch from the great sacred tree needed to craft the staff, it'll be within these next 2 days. Someone from the Loki Familia should notify you. You don't need to worry about the price of acquiring the branch, including the cost of the other materials." Her tone was relaxed, and there was even a hint of anticipation in it. Glintstone. It didn't belong to this world at all, like a magic stone fallen from beyond the heavens. Combined with top-tier materials used for crafting high-grade staves, what kind of result would it produce in the end? As the goddess of forging, Hephaestus was extremely curious. Isn't this a bit too much? Covering everything. Even in the original story, Belle had never received treatment like this. Ron himself hadn't expected that he would enjoy such special treatment from Hephaestus. He hadn't forgotten what he had originally promised. During tomorrow's dungeon exploration, when going into the world behind the fog gate, he would try to find another Erdtree burial watchdog, and extract another glintstone from the staff for Hephaestus. Hephaestus glanced at the boy in front of her. She understood that Ron was worried the material cost would be pushed onto Hestia. She gently shook her head, "No need to worry about materials. Just from the profits of the Apollo war game bets alone, we earned enough to forge several first-class weapons. Just treat it as your appearance fee." After saying this, Hephaestus's calm gaze swept over the supporter's backpack filled with spoils, and she asked, "Anything else?" Yes. These are today's drops from defeating a floor boss in the dungeon. I'd like to customize a set of high-grade armor for the members of the Familia." This was Ron's primary objective. The previously commissioned glintstone staff had been purely an unexpected bonus. As he explained his purpose, he opened the large supporter's backpack. Then, the gray-brown scales of the ancient dragon Lanciax appeared before Hephaestus. Nothing good ever comes when this guy shows up. Yet strangely, Hephaestus found herself already used to it. She swept her gaze over the drops. The surface of the gray-brown scales was filled with mottled traces, as if they had endured the passage of endless time. But these traces hadn't diminished the scales' effectiveness. On the contrary, they had become more restrained. As she examined them closely, when her gaze fell upon that reverse scale, her expression froze. Because, within that scale, she detected a distinct aura of dragonkin. If this thing were placed in the dungeon, it would absolutely be an extremely rare monster. So-called infant dragons were merely lizards with impure bloodlines. True monsters that carried dragonkin aura. At the very least, their strength would not be below level 4. Looking back at Ron once again, Hephaestus's expression grew complicated. She curled her lips slightly. "So, you specifically slaughtered a dragon just to make equipment for your Familia members?" Right now it was an ancient dragon. And that was based on Ron's current level 3 strength. If he stood at the very top of Aura Rio, what kind of monster would be placed in front of her then? Hard to imagine. Forget it. Since this guy belonged to Hestia's Familia, after all. Hephaestus waved her hand casually. "I won't charge you for materials or forging, considering the war game profits. But I'll take a portion of the remaining dragonkin materials." "Thank you, Lady Hephaestus. We've got free gear again, brothers. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 156, Chapter 156, Dionysus's Plan. 1345 words. Lord Takamikazuchi, I'm back. Inside the communal residence. After encountering a minotaur, and with Ron stepping in to help, he had barely managed to escape danger, and had also received words of encouragement from his senior. Bell did not rush back to Rio. Instead, he continued on the current floor, clearing monsters and improving himself. If the future is yours, then prove it to me. Those words became the driving force behind Bell's constant effort. As long as he put in the work, his ability values would definitely improve as they should. And then, the result turned out exactly as Ron had said. Monsters of that level would only appear in the middle floors. Around them, creatures like goblins and dungeon lizards weren't yet at a level that was truly troublesome. How much will my ability values increase this time? The white-haired boy was filled with anticipation. Even though he knew that, in a short period of time, he absolutely couldn't catch up to Ron, it didn't change the fact that the image of that figure, facing the black minotaur, with overwhelming strength, had left an indelible mark in his heart. At noon, Takamikazuchi had just gotten off work from the Jagamurukan stall, making it the perfect time to update ability values and take a brief rest in Rio. As for the remaining time, of course, it was to keep striving toward the goal he wished to reach. Bell, how did your dungeon exploration go today? With black hair tied into twin braids and dressed in a light white kimono, Takamikazuchi's expression softened slightly upon seeing Bell return safely. That's right. In this white-haired boy, he seemed to see a reflection of Ron. Perhaps in terms of talent, he couldn't replicate the miracle Ron had created, but in combat arts and technique, Bell showed extremely high potential. With a bit of training, he could definitely become a core member of the Takamikazuchi familia. After arriving in Rio, Takamikazuchi was the second god Bell had met. Back then, when he tried to join other powerful familias, forget meeting the gods, he couldn't even get through the door. Understandable, really. When he was struggling with finding a place to stay and the high cost of living in Rio, he had met Takamikazuchi, who was working at a Jagamurukan stall on North Main Street. A simple conversation. Faced with the invitation of the god of war, Bell simply chose to join his familia. Although they hadn't known each other long, he could already feel the god's gentle personality. Still, when faced with Takamikazuchi's kind question, the boy found it a bit hard to answer. Was it smooth? Overall, it probably was. During the exploration, although the monsters he encountered were somewhat troublesome, he could still handle them using the techniques Lord Takamikazuchi had taught him. He could defeat them without much trouble. But when he recalled that massive creature, the minotaur that nearly blocked the entire tunnel, and how he had no means to fight it, forced to flee in panic. Death had been right at his doorstep. After thinking it through, Bell gently shook his head. Overall, it should have been pretty smooth, I guess. But when I reached the 5th floor, I ran into a minotaur. Luckily, Senior Ron happened to pass by, otherwise, I don't know if I would have made it back safely. Ron. That was a name Takamikazuchi would never forget. Especially when Bell had encountered a powerful monster, and Ron had stepped in to help in time. Even Mikoto, one of his own familia members, was training within Ron's group. He really should find time to properly thank him. With a relaxed smile, he nodded. Ron, he really is an outstanding adventurer. When you met him this time, did he say anything to you? He told me to work harder. It was hard to imagine. The once complete rookie adventurer who needed guidance was now starting to resemble a senior figure. Takamikazuchi gently shook his head, and taking advantage of the free time, casually asked, "Do you want me to update your ability values?" "I came to find you for exactly that, Lord Takamikazuchi." "All right. Working hard is good, but you also need to balance work and rest. As for dungeon exploration, if there's anything you don't understand, you can ask Ron. He should be able to give you some general direction." Updating ability values was something Takamikazuchi had long been familiar with. However, after completing the process, when he looked at the divine script newly overlaid on the boy's back, it was normal for newcomers to experience a phase of rapid ability growth. All the stats had indeed improved noticeably. But that wasn't what Takamikazuchi truly cared about. When his gaze shifted to the skill section, the previously empty space now contained a newly acquired skill. The good news: the Familia member he recruited seemed to have excellent talent. The problem was, the detailed interpretation of this skill left Takamikazuchi with a complicated feeling. From an objective standpoint, this skill was unprecedentedly powerful. Hero Aspiration greatly increases the speed at which Bell improves his ability values through training, far beyond other adventurers. The stronger the longing in his heart, the stronger the effect. Fighting alongside or against the object of his admiration, Ron, further enhances the effect. Question mark. Why does this feel a bit strange? This skill could make Bell's growth speed surpass the vast majority of adventurers. But its source. Takamikazuchi's mood became complicated. Aspiration. An aspiration to become an adventurer like Ron. He had finally trained Yamato Mikoto into a level 2 adventurer. As someone in a parental role, he naturally supported her in finding her own future. But Bell. He had just recruited him, barely had time to warm him up, and yet somehow he was already tied to Ron. Takamikazuchi couldn't help but twitch at the corner of his mouth. He knew Ron possessed secrets even the gods couldn't decipher. But wasn't this influence a bit too much? Your talent is indeed as outstanding as I imagined. Dionysus Familia. Golden hair draped naturally over his shoulders. Beneath that refined and gentle appearance, after drinking the divine wine that removed cognitive suppression, Dionysus could no longer suppress the madness in his amber eyes. Sending Philvis to gather information about Ron had only yielded rumors circulating among adventurers. There was still doubt about their accuracy. So, Dionysus chose not to wait passively. Using divine wine capable of blocking cognition and hypnotizing himself, he disguised himself as the loser of that war game bet, going around questioning other gods to gather information. The latest news. Ron, the rookie adventurer known as the Tarnished, had already advanced to level 3. This rate of growth was truly absurd. Even in Dionysus's eyes, it had already reached a completely monstrous level. At this pace, it wouldn't take long before he reached the level of the Sword Princess, Ace Wallenstein. And that was something Dionysus absolutely could not accept. The stronger Orario's adventurers became, the greater the obstacle they posed to his madness plan to destroy the city. But eliminating Ron directly would be too much of a waste of his talent. After thinking it over, looking at the black-haired elf who had returned to the Familia base, Dionysus frowned. Philvis. Find a way to encounter Ron in the dungeon. Gain his trust. If you can arrange a private meeting at the Familia base, that would be ideal. His gaze fell on the crystal-clear wine in the silver cup on the table. If it could intoxicate even a god, then hypnotizing a level 3 adventurer and rewriting his thoughts, making him transfer to the poor goddess Peneus Familia, would be nothing difficult at all. Dionysus looked forward to it. He looked forward to the day he would no longer have to lie dormant in this city devoid of chaos and slaughter. And to the moment when Orario would be completely overturned. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 157, Chapter 157, Riveria's Invitation. 1,140 words. The matter of equipment had already been settled. When he left Hephaestus's weapon shop, it was already around noon. Ron didn't linger and immediately began heading back, returning to the new Familia residence. Hearth Mansion. This was the new name chosen by Hestia. He had no objections. After all, the deity of the Familia symbolized hearth and home. However, when he arrived outside the Familia mansion, Ron saw a familiar elven girl. She seemed to be hesitating, unsure how to approach, since she represented the Loki familia. Even if they knew each other privately, visiting like this wasn't exactly appropriate. She hadn't even noticed the footsteps behind her. Lafia, are you looking for me? The sudden greeting made the already nervous golden-haired elf stiffen. She straightened up abruptly and turned around. When she saw it was Ron, the tension in Lafia's eyes finally faded. She let out a long breath. Yeah. I was looking for you. After all, I'm a member of the Loki familia. Dropping by the Hestia familia out of nowhere, especially to see the captain, just feels a bit inappropriate. After explaining her purpose briefly, the golden-haired elf blinked her sapphire-like eyes and stared at the clean-cut young man with disbelief. Their first meeting, that adventurer who had been willing to risk his own safety to save her, had already left a deep impression in Lafia's heart. Especially after learning that during the time she had gone on a familia expedition and left Rio, Ron had accomplished such feats, she felt a strange sense of shared pride. Ron is amazing, right? He's my friend. Ron. Congratulations on reaching level 3. I really didn't expect it. You caught up to me so quickly in terms of adventurer level. Thanks. I've just been through a bit of hardship, that's all. After becoming an adventurer, Ron had never chased after anyone. He simply followed his own pace, training his abilities, raising his stats, and steadily leveling up. So even after leveling up, he didn't feel much. He knew very clearly, he wasn't at a point where he could afford to slack off. Compared to casual congratulations between friends, Ron was more curious about the real reason this elven girl had come to the Hestia familia. Miss Lafia. You didn't come here just to congratulate me, did you? Lafia nodded firmly. When alone, she didn't feel the pressure she did around Captain Finn, or her mentor Riveria. With her hands clasped behind her back, she glanced around, then tilted her head and smiled mischievously. Then, how about we talk somewhere else? Sure. The golden-haired elf in front of him was undoubtedly a beautiful girl. Unlike other elves, she wasn't arrogant, nor did she look down equally on all adventurers. She was approachable, yet still had the kind of romantic charm expected at her age. Faced with Lafia's invitation, Ron nodded readily. You pick the place. Then. The garden. Going to a cafe or something, it feels like it'd make you spend money. Lafia looked toward the flower beds blooming inside the familia grounds. As the breeze passed, she could even catch the faint fragrance of flowers. I'm actually pretty well off. Ron watched the energetic girl ahead, her pink skirt fluttering, her golden ponytail swaying lightly, and suddenly felt his mood lift. Her white thigh-high stockings perfectly outlined her legs. As an adventurer, her muscles weren't bulky at all, nor were they thin like sticks, just perfectly balanced. A beautiful girl. Let's just treat this as a rare moment of normal life. With that thought, Ron stepped forward, following Lafia. As for her real reason for coming, it was probably their encounter earlier in the dungeon. Ancient Dragon Lanciax. Dungeon Anomaly. Given their friendship, if Finn or Riveria pressed her a bit and connected the two encounters, they could reach the truth. That was indeed troublesome. But fortunately, the Loki familia wasn't as despicable as Apollo's. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent Lafia to test his attitude like this. Lafia. Can you tell me now why you came? At that moment, Lafia was crouching on the ground, carefully observing a flower stubbornly growing from a crack between stones. When she heard Ron's question, in the end, she didn't reach out to pick it. It's about the great sacred tree branch. I've already written back to the elven homeland, but whether I can secure it for you, I can't guarantee it yet. By the end, her voice carried hesitation. But when she raised her head, she looked straight at Ron. And also my mentor. Lady Riveria, she wants to meet you. The development of events didn't surprise Ron. As the source of the dungeon's abnormal phenomenon, something capable of continuously producing mutated monsters, even incubating powerful floor bosses, for ordinary adventurers, it would be a huge problem. But for Orario's top-tier faction, the Loki Familia, it was practically a machine for boosting their members' ability values, a walking source of great achievements. Having roughly guessed the truth, they wanted to make contact. What truly surprised him was the so-called Great Sacred Tree branch. That matter had been handled by Hephaestus, perhaps she had reached some agreement with Loki. Ron frowned slightly. But when facing the girl's guilty gaze, he didn't blame her. As his familia developed and explored further, his secret would never remain perfectly hidden. After all, there were countless adventurers in Orario. It was impossible to clear out every floor before entering the dungeon. That simply wasn't realistic. This has nothing to do with you. As for Lady Riveria's invitation, once I have time, I can go. The only condition is that your goddess won't mind me visiting the Loki Familia's base. Hearing his answer, the elven girl looked up in surprise. She had thought Ron would be angry about the information leak, but instead, he agreed so easily. Her voice softened as she explained, "Sorry. At the time, I didn't think much about it. When Lady Riveria asked me, I told her about what happened when we first met." As a core member being cultivated by her familia, Lafia's social circle was naturally monitored. Moreover, in Ron's view, this might not be such a bad outcome. Even if the dungeon anomaly became known through other channels, forming some kind of cooperation with the Loki Familia, as long as he gained the backing of Orario's strongest faction, he wouldn't have to worry about being blacklisted by the guild after his secret was exposed. Looking at the surprised girl, Ron shook his head lightly, smiling with ease. "Lafia, you're one of the few friends I have. There's something I need you to pass along for me. That is, as for the meeting, let's discuss the timing after Lady Riveria has prepared the Great Sacred Tree branch. I believe she definitely won't leak this kind of information. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 158, Chapter 158, Hestia is taking action. 1,756 words. Nice weather. It's just a pity Ron has to go explore the dungeon every day. With such great timing, if it were spent on a date, just how amazing would that be? Leaving the Adventurers Guild. Orario's weather was exceptionally bright, the blue sky stretched cloudless for miles, and when the sunlight fell upon her, the girl only felt a gentle warmth. It was just a pity. When she looked to her side, that figure she longed for day and night wasn't there. As for her purpose in coming to the guild, it was simple, to submit the current basic information of her familia. A new member had joined the familia. This kind of information had to be reported to the Adventurers Guild, both to facilitate the evaluation of the familia's rank, and to update the level information of existing members. Reporting it didn't bring many direct benefits. But if it were concealed and later discovered by the guild, what would most likely await the Hestia Familia would be fines from the Adventurers Guild, and mandatory expeditions. Nor was this something Hestia had decided on her own. All of it was the conclusion she and Ron had reached after discussion. Since one event after another had made it impossible for them to maintain a low profile in Orario, then they might as well declare it to all adventurers and gods in Orario. "This is my familia." The effect was remarkable. Originally, the one receiving her had only been a guild staff member named Mia, but when it came time to update the familia members' levels, the guild supervisor personally stepped in. They repeatedly confirmed whether the information was accurate. Isn't that obvious? To prevent Ron's various stats, which broke theoretical limits, from being too shocking, she had adjusted the submitted data to average them out. All of them were rated at A. With 2 consecutive LV.2 adventurers joining, and with both Ron and Mikoto advancing to LV.3 adventurers, the final result was that the once obscure Hestia Familia, in an instant, had risen to a composite evaluation of C as an exploration familia. I wonder. Does this even count as good news? For exploration familias developing in Ora Rio, dungeon expedition missions were required. But as long as they completed the guild's assigned tasks, they would receive rewards. A considerable amount of valus. Even the taxes required when exchanging magic stones and drop items from daily exploration would be reduced accordingly. It could be considered good news, at least. Hestia was already eager to wait for Ron to finish today's dungeon exploration so she could tell him this. The familia was steadily getting back on track. But thinking of this, the girl couldn't help feeling a bit melancholic. Everything was clearly moving in a better direction, yet her relationship with Ron had completely stagnated. Is it because my hints weren't obvious enough? Walking along the road back to the Hearth Mansion, Hestia was somewhat absent-minded. Even after moving into a bigger home, their daily life hadn't changed. Every day after waking up, Ron would either go out for his usual training or head into the dungeon. If there was anything different, it was probably that the number of women appearing around Ron had clearly increased. That guy seemed to be radiating charm at all times, yet he hadn't noticed. The one who had always been by his side. So annoying. Thinking of this, the girl felt a little depressed. Although Ron had never said it outright, in their everyday interactions, she always felt as if some kind of pressure was chasing after him, preventing him from relaxing, forcing him to keep pushing himself, constantly improving. Even though, in Hestia's eyes, his current pace had already reached a level no adventurer in Ora Rio, or even the entire world, could match, it still wasn't enough. Slow down a little and enjoy the present life. As a goddess, there was no way Hestia could say something like that. She couldn't possibly dampen the enthusiasm of her familia's child. Just as she was thinking about how to help Ron, a breeze passed by, carrying with it a faint trace of floral fragrance, like morning mist gently wrapping around her senses, instantly calming the girl's troubled heart. Dear Flora Flower Shop. Hestia raised her head and quickly found the source of the fragrance. She had long known about this shop, but due to her previous lack of funds, she had never stopped by. It wasn't that she had started indulging just because she now had money. The girl frowned. This faint floral scent could soothe and relax the mind. If placed on the bedside table in the bedroom, would it help relieve Ron's stress from exploring the dungeon? Then let's give it a try. Noticing Hestia's arrival, the two girls watering the bouquets both stopped what they were doing. If Ron were here, he would definitely recognize the identity of the prom girl. Liliruka Arde. Seeing that the customer was a goddess, standing beside Lily, the tall, golden-haired, naturally curly-haired girl seemed unsure how to handle the situation. Just as Anna Clays hesitated. Recognizing that the petite goddess before them was Hestia, Ron's patron deity, Lily smiled earnestly, Lady Hestia. Are you here to buy flowers? She hadn't left the Soma Familia, but after their former captain Xanis was killed by Ron, the Familia had once again fallen into chaos. Everyone was scrambling for the position of captain, and no one paid attention to Lily, who had originally been a bottom-tier supporter, and had already slipped away with her belongings. For Ron, who had indirectly helped her escape that quagmire, Lily held a sense of gratitude. She also knew he wasn't particularly fond of her, so she didn't go out of her way to annoy him. Noticing that Hestia's gaze swept across the bouquets without settling on any, she guessed that perhaps this goddess didn't have a specific target. Today's newly arrived Cecilia flowers are quite nice. The buds haven't fully bloomed yet. Whether placed in a bedroom or a familia residence, their fragrance can last for several days. Lady Hestia. Which kind would you like? As for why this prom shop assistant knew her, Hestia wasn't surprised at all. Ultimately, the reason was the war game with Apollo. Facing the question, she thought carefully for a moment, Do you have something where the fragrance isn't too strong, preferably something that helps calm the mind and relieve stress? We do. The girl's fundamentals were solid. Upon hearing Hestia's request, she quickly selected something suitable from the shelf, How about lavender? That works. And also please pack a bundle of those Cecilia flowers as well. Lavender had an effect of easing anxiety. As a goddess, having lived for ages in the heavens, Hestia naturally knew about such things. As for the Cecilia flowers she ultimately chose, it wasn't because of their appearance, but because of their flower language. The true love of a wanderer. She didn't believe that with Cecilia flowers placed daily in the familiar residence, Ron would fail to understand her hint. No matter how many women surrounded him, so what? His true feelings had to belong to her. Watching the shop assistant skillfully wrap the flowers, Hestia took out her purse. If the price was reasonable, she could even order them daily. How much is it in total? The total is. After wrapping the lavender in oil paper, Anna raised her head and calculated the price. Just as she was about to speak, she was interrupted by Lily. Freed from the oppression of the Soma Familia, the girl's mental state had clearly improved. Gone was her former exhaustion. With a gentle smile, Lily said, "No need to pay, Lady Hestia." "Why?" Because once, I received help from a member of Lady Hestia's Familia. If I hadn't met him, there wouldn't be the Lily of today. Holding the 2 bundles of flowers, Hestia didn't know how to describe her feelings. When Lily said that, the only member she could think of was her own Ron. For a moment, she didn't know whether to feel proud or to complain. How was it that even randomly entering a flower shop, she could run into a girl he had helped? Perhaps the meaning behind the Cecilia flowers' language, wanderer, was exactly this. The girl shook her head lightly and declined the goodwill of the shop assistant named Lily. "I appreciate your kindness, but I still need to pay. I don't want to become the kind of goddess who only lives off Ron in the eyes of others." After leaving Dear Flora flower shop, Hestia walked back toward the Familia residence along the street. Lily's appearance made her feel a slight sense of pressure. This gratitude might just be one-sided appreciation for Ron's past help. But if this kind of thing kept happening, sooner or later someone might truly fall for him and actively pursue him. What would she do then? "I have to make the first move." She had been there from the very beginning. Having made up her mind, the girl's light steps gradually became firm. However, after returning to the Familia residence, before Hestia could push open the door, in the distance ahead, in that garden they had once promised to build together, a high ponytailed elf girl with yamabuki-colored hair was currently crouching beside the flower bed. Who is that? However, when Hestia noticed Ron standing beside her, the identity of that elf girl instantly became irrelevant. This is bad. Her backyard looked like it was about to catch fire. Especially when Lafia stood up, and the armband symbolizing the Loki Familia came into view. At that moment, she had only one thought: why does it feel like the sky is about to collapse? Just recently at the Donatus, she had even thanked Loki for her so-called kind reminder, telling her to watch out for Freya. But now that the truth was right in front of her, Hestia wished she could go find that flat-chested goddess immediately. So, who exactly was setting their sights on her Ron? The evidence was right there before her. She refused to believe Loki had anything left to argue. But before going to confront Loki, Hestia felt that merely declaring ownership in front of gods wasn't enough. She had to make all adventurers in Ora Rio realize this. Ron could only belong to her. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 159, Chapter 159, Taking the Initiative. 1754 words. After finishing his conversation with Lafia. As for what choice to make, in the end it still depended on Riveria's thoughts. If some level of cooperation could be reached, then considering the still unexplored difficulty of the mid-level floors, when carrying out dungeon exploration, Ron wouldn't mind bringing along part of the core strength of the Loki Familia, like the girl right in front of him, Lafia, who hadn't yet broken through to level 4. The more luxurious the exploration party, the more confidence they would have when facing all kinds of unknown threats. That's the situation. If the matter regarding the great sacred tree branch is already settled, I'll take the initiative to visit the Loki Familia. There are also some parts that you all would be interested in. To be able to successfully graduate from the school district, Lafia was naturally not some naive fool. It was just that after hearing Ron's answer, the speculation that had originally formed in her heart was now confirmed. Dungeon anomaly incidents were all caused by the young men of the same age standing before her. That also reasonably explained why they had encountered that goblin guard on floor 1, as well as today's floor boss, the ancient dragon Lanciax. Then no matter what, we're still friends. Noticing the trace of unease in the elf girl's eyes, Ron easily guessed what she was thinking. She was worried this matter would become a barrier between them. After lightly shaking his head, he smiled brightly and said, "In the future, there'll probably be quite a lot of times I'll need to trouble you, like today's kind of overspec dungeon exploration, Lafia. You're not scared, are you?" It couldn't even be considered comforting words. Yet at this moment, they were continuously nourishing Lafia's heart. As she looked straight into the boy's clear brown eyes, the corners of her eyes curved, and she nodded seriously. The secret behind why Ron could repeatedly break records was already laid bare before her. She knew that no matter what, she had to live up to this trust. But when she noticed Hestia appearing behind them, her mood instantly became tense. "I have to respond." Lafia pressed her pink lips together, then finally gathered her courage and said, "In the past, I knew you because we met in the dungeon. And for certain reasons, we were just acquaintances. But from now on, I want to get to know you better. And then find a way to grow stronger." There was no way she could let Ron leave her far behind, right? However, the elf girl's one-sided declaration made Hestia's already bad mood worsen to the point that even the smile at the corner of her lips completely stiffened. "What are you doing?" But after all, she was still a goddess, and she hadn't truly confirmed a relationship with Ron yet. She couldn't bring herself to directly drive Lafia away. Her dim, lifeless gaze swept toward the boy. "Ron. Is this adventurer your friend? A love battlefield? That would indeed be interesting." Facing the gazes of both Hestia and Lafia at the same time, though both were beautiful girls, Ron felt a pressure as if he were facing a black dragon. His gaze firmed. "Lady Hestia, would you like to hear me explain, defend myself a bit?" After seeing Lafia off, Ron told Hestia everything that had happened in the dungeon today, encountering the ancient dragon Lanciax, and meeting the Loki Familia, without leaving anything out. However, he very naturally concealed the part about the transaction. Because of Hestia's personality, Ron knew she would definitely become unnecessarily worried, and a qualified Familia member shouldn't make their own god worry. That's how things went. And also, earlier Lady Hephaestus said she wanted to forge a staff for me. Lafia came to find me to pass along that message. It wasn't a lie. Everything he said was true, but how much he left out. Don't ask. I see. Even though she received an explanation. As she looked at the refined boy sitting beside her, the girl's tone was still filled with resentment. Her gaze drifted toward the Cecilia flowers in the vase on the table. Hestia felt that it just didn't match the mood. So she decided she had to take some action. "Ron, you should know, our Familia and the Loki Familia are both exploration-type familias. In other words, we're in a kind of competitive relationship. It's best to maintain a proper distance from other familias." At this point, Hestia raised her brows slightly, trying to hint to this blockhead, "And also, Ron, have you noticed? Ahem. Lately, haven't there been a few too many women appearing around you? After all, this is a private matter. As your god, I can't interfere too much. But if the secrets on you were to leak out, that would be dangerous." She had never truly put on the airs of a god, to the point that even she herself felt awkward all over. Words like "Ron, you can only be mine," were something she simply couldn't say out loud. "Then what should I do?" He wasn't actually dense. The hidden meaning behind Hestia's words, and that obvious sour scent in the air. It was exactly this kind of question that Ron really couldn't answer. But if he had to give up the entire forest for the treasure in front of him, there was no way he could make that choice. After thinking it over, he decided to break the stalemate with sincerity. Lady Hestia, I'll pay attention to this kind of thing. And then? That was a very standard answer. But it wasn't what Hestia wanted. Her azure eyes were filled with expectation, and even her mood couldn't help but grow tense. Thank you for your concern, Lady Hestia. This conversation just couldn't go on. Depressed. The girl felt that all the frustration she had never experienced in the heavens was now being fully manifested through Ron. She crossed her arms over her ample chest. Perhaps because of her breathing, Hestia's chest, far too full for her petite appearance, rose and fell continuously, determined to make Ron recognize who the best choice was. Ron. What do you think of me? Cute. Such a straightforward answer instead caused Hestia's tense expression to instantly collapse, her face visibly flushed with red. Thump, thump, thump. It was as if her heartbeat could be heard. She pressed her lips together, feeling her burning cheeks, then setting aside being an adventurer, you still have to think about life, right, Ron? What's your ideal type? A soul-level interrogation from a goddess. Ron still couldn't be like Belle from the original story, frankly declaring his preference for blonde, big-curved women. He frowned slightly and thought carefully. The cute type. At least so far, all the girls he had met in Rio were quite cute. Besides, a real man never chooses, of course he chooses all of them. However, just as Ron finished saying that, the girl beside him crashed into his arms. Even though he hadn't explicitly named anyone, those repeated answers meant that in Hestia's eyes, Ron had already made his final choice. Feeling that softness unique to a girl. No normal man could endure such a situation. But as the goddess of the hearth, forming a bond wasn't so simple. At the very least, from the perspective of a tarnished save file, he would need the strength to become a consort king. Ron decided to change the topic, Lady Hestia. After the tough battle against the mutated floor boss in the dungeon today, I want to update my fauna, and see how much my abilities have improved. Is this really the time to bring that up? Hestia frowned slightly, but she also knew what mattered more. Reluctantly, she released her arms from around Ron, her tone full of lingering resentment. Fine. Ron. Level, LV.3. Strength, I0H176. Endurance, I0F307. Dexterity, I0H133. Agility, I0H140. Magic, I0G201. His ability values had once again seen a leap-like improvement. Especially his endurance stat, which had already pulled far ahead of the others. Hestia found it hard to imagine just how much brutal tempering Ron's body had undergone in the dungeon. Her heart couldn't help but ache. And under the equipped tarnished save, what was clearly visible was the increase in skill methods. Dragon Fire transforms the user into a dragon and breathes fire. The skill can be charged to extend the duration of the breath. Thunderfire Sword summons a sword interwoven with lightning and fire. Death Lightning Strike calls down violent death lightning in the surrounding area. The lightning carries a death-inducing abnormal status effect. Lanciax's Blade. Power derived from the ancient dragon Lanciax. Summons a red lightning blade that releases lightning when sweeping across targets. Question mark. For an ordinary adventurer, having 2 or 3 skills was already enough to prove excellent talent. But Ron was completely different. These skills, why did it feel like they were wholesale goods? As a goddess, she couldn't interpret the character save slot skill, she could only grasp its general effect, but she never imagined it would be this outrageous. Most importantly, these skill descriptions were things she had never seen even on Daphne or Cassandra. Was this the power of a dragon-blooded lineage? A bit ridiculous. The girl couldn't help but murmur absent-mindedly. All of them were special skills meant for real combat. Any one of them, taken individually, would likely be considered a trump card by adventurers. She couldn't imagine their actual effects. Hestia was certain, her Ron would, in the future, walk a path among adventurers that none could surpass. Perhaps, only when he possessed enough strength to truly feel at ease would he consider stepping out of the identity of an adventurer and actually enjoying life. Very good. No matter what, she would accompany him to the very end. Just as she was about to record the ability values and specific skill effects, this goddess finally noticed the last section of the fauna panel. Great feat. The indicator of whether an adventurer could level up. Logically speaking, since he had just leveled up not long ago, this section should have been empty. But now, Ron's great feat section was once again filled by the ancient dragon. Question mark. You don't tell me you're planning to push straight into LV.4 in one go. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 160, Chapter 160, The Adventurers Guild Mission. 1,548 words. After slaying the ancient dragon Lanciax, the great feat it provided was already enough for Ron to smoothly break through to LV.4. What he lacked now were his ability values. Burned by the flames of power within, his endurance had far surpassed his other stats, reaching a level that could only be described as overwhelmingly dominant. It was indeed an excellent way to grow stronger. It's just that, when he recalled the pain from back then, Ron still felt lingering fear. At the end of the day, every one of his attributes matched the effort he had put in while facing floor bosses in the dungeon. What truly concerned him, however, were the various ashes of warlike prayers dropped after killing Lanciax. Just from their descriptions alone, one could already tell the effects of these prayer-type abilities. If used in future dungeon explorations, they would absolutely become his greatest support when dealing with all kinds of special monsters. As for Hestia's earlier amazement, after putting his shirt back on, Ron simply smiled and shook his head, pursuing speed alone. Feels meaningless. I'd rather widen the gap between myself and other adventurers in terms of ability values. Already used to her Familia member's steady personality, Hestia didn't refute him. If he kept progressing at this pace, she didn't even dare imagine how outrageous Ron's leveling speed would become. After the brief interlude of updating his status, it was clearly difficult to return to the earlier atmosphere. She summarized today's key point. Ron. First, our Familia's rating has been raised to C. Once a Familia surpasses D rank, the Adventurers Guild will issue expedition missions. Sooner or later, you, Mikoto, and Daphne will have to go on a dungeon expedition. At this point, her mood grew somewhat melancholic. Part of it was concern for Ron and the Familia members' safety. But more importantly, expeditions always took a long time. Which meant Hestia would no longer be able to wake up and see Ron every day. As expected, a Familia expedition was completely normal for exploration-type Familias. Issued by the Adventurers Guild, such missions required reaching a designated floor and killing a specified number of monsters to complete the task. The rewards were substantial. But if it was a forced expedition, then it was a punishment imposed by the guild. Having spent time in Rio, Ron had already figured all of this out. It was something every Familia would eventually have to experience. What I'm worried about is how difficult it will be. The Hestia Familia had been rated C rank in Rio that already placed them among the backbone forces. After all, true S-rank Familias only included Loki and Freya. What troubled him was, if the Adventurers Guild set the expedition target at floor 24, entering the lower floors. Ron didn't even dare imagine how difficult it would be. When he first ventured alone, just reaching the middle floors had taken him over a month. During that time, he had even advanced to LV.3, going deeper. Would it become easier? The answer was obvious. That damn dungeon would do everything in its power to kill him, twisted monsters, lethal traps, and all kinds of hellish scenarios. Familiar scenes flooded his mind. And now, he would also have to ensure the safety of the entire team. He couldn't move too fast. Ron could already imagine his exploration time being stretched endlessly. Hestia noticed the slight frown on his face. Though she had never entered the dungeon herself, she knew Ron's daily routine, living on the edge of a blade. In fact, when she went to the Adventurers Guild today to register Familia information, she had faintly sensed their bond disappear for a moment, only to return shortly after. He had died. And then revived almost immediately. Even after Ron reached LV.3, undergoing a complete qualitative transformation in strength, that reality still hadn't changed. Hestia didn't know how to help him. All she could do was try her best to ease his mood with a gentle smile. There should be a way, right? We'll win. Rather than worrying about the future. It was better to focus on getting stronger. Ron shook off his chaotic thoughts, and met the goddess's concerned gaze. His tone was bright, and besides, the Adventurers Guild probably wouldn't issue an expedition mission right after upgrading our Familia rating. Even if they do, there should be countermeasures. Call for backup. Worst case, he could call in Senior Rio. And if that hopeless elf wasn't available, then Lafia, the magic idiot from the Loki Familia, would definitely be eager to explore his Souls-like dungeon. However, just as Ron finished speaking, a knock came from the bedroom door. After getting Hestia's permission, Daphne, short brown hair, sharp brows, pushed it open. Looking at her goddess and her captain, her expression was complicated as she spoke seriously. Lady Hestia, Captain Ron. An Adventurers Guild staff member has come to visit our Familia. ? The atmosphere instantly turned strange. The guild rarely took the initiative to visit a Familia. If they did, it was most likely something troublesome related to expeditions. What you fear is exactly what comes. Ron's smile stiffened as he looked at Daphne. Don't tell me. The expedition is already here. Though she didn't want to admit it, that was exactly the case. Back when she was in the Apollo Familia, Daphne had experienced this before. A familiar staff member would visit in person to deliver expedition missions. But after today's dungeon experience, that absurdly strong black-skinned minotaur comparable to LV.3, and the floor boss ancient dragon Lanciax appearing on floor 12, without Ron, whether they could even return safely was uncertain. The expedition hadn't even started yet. They didn't even know the target. And yet, Daphne already felt immense pressure. The worst part? Familius couldn't easily refuse guild missions. Most likely. It's exactly what you're thinking, Captain Ron. Upon hearing the worst-case scenario, Ron didn't delay. After all, guild staff were merely messengers, not decision-makers. There was no reason to make things difficult for them. He quickly composed himself, hiding his thoughts, and stood up from the bed. Where are they? The reception hall. Cassandra is receiving them. Daphne's face remained serious as she analyzed their options. After experiencing the dungeon's Souls-like difficulty firsthand today, she didn't feel like retreating. Only this kind of extreme difficulty could truly push one's strength to grow. Regret? Not at all. Since the mission couldn't be refused, then they would solve it with strategy. As she followed Ron toward the reception hall, she suggested, Captain Ron, if the expedition target isn't too far, you could stay behind in the Familia. Mikoto, Cassandra, and I can handle the rest. The dungeon hasn't gotten harder, and Mikoto is LV.3, completing the guild's requirements shouldn't be a problem. As expected of the former commander of the Apollo Familia, her thinking was sharp. In just a short time, she had already come up with a solution. Take advantage of loopholes. The guild couldn't require every member to participate. As long as the objective was completed, that was enough. Talking about this now might be a bit early. Ron didn't reject the idea outright. It could serve as a backup plan, sending members to complete the mission while he stayed in Rio, exploring separately. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors of the reception hall, Ron's expression was calm again, a composed smile on his face. "I'm the captain of the Hestia Familia. Ron. What arrangements does the Adventurers Guild have for us?" Then, the moment he saw the half-elf girl sitting on the sofa, his expression froze slightly. Not because she wasn't beautiful. She had short brown hair. Her princess-cut bangs accentuated her delicate face. A fitted black blazer and white shirt outlined her figure. The square black-framed glasses on her nose added a touch of maturity. Ina Toole. It seemed she had finally met the person she was looking for. The half-elf gently adjusted her glasses and stood up elegantly. Looking at the now much taller young man, it felt as though time had slipped away like sand between fingers. The rookie adventurer who once came to her for advice on early dungeon floors had now become one of Aurario's rising stars. A faint smile curved on Ina's lips, her eyes bright. "Long time no see, Mr. Ron. You too, Miss Ina." Since his dungeon exploration had gotten on track, Ron rarely visited the guild. A lot had happened in the meantime: the Soma Familia incident, the Apollo Familia conflict. He had even stood her up on picking a beginner's staff. Yet when facing her now, he didn't feel awkward. Just as he was about to explain, Ina saw through his thoughts and shook her head lightly. "Today, I'm here as a representative of the Adventurers Guild. If it were another time, I'd be very interested in hearing about what's happened to you recently." At this point, her smile faded. "Recently, abnormal phenomena have been occurring frequently in the dungeon. The guild intends to conduct a full investigation. Therefore, we are issuing an expedition investigation mission to the Hestia Familia. Considering your familia's C rank, the final objective is, reach the end of the middle floors. Floor 24. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.